How can you use storytelling techniques to write better music? What is the golden repair? And how do we deal with the inner critic? He's the author of the book, The Magical Impact of Storytelling. Please welcome Jeff Leisawitz to the Music Production Podcast. Jeff, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you. We spoke, I think we said it was like about 2 years ago. And that was when you released your book, Not Effing Around, which is a fun read and has some great takeaways. And now you have a new one, The Magical Impact of Storytelling.
How to
Very
open
exciting.
minds
Congratulations.
and connect hearts. Thank you. Yeah, I'm all about the storytelling and thought I'd write a book about it.
You know, when I saw the title of the book and I started looking through it, it reminded me of a story you told me last time we spoke about getting into music. And I think you were at like a summer camp or something, and there was like an older dude that was like, "Hey man, check this out. I showed you drums." And I think the Who's Won't Be Fooled Again.
Very good. Yeah.
And it occurred to me like, that's the story. And that's kind of like the folklore of your, coming to be. And it stuck with me as opposed to like, I just kind of got into music. An older guy showed me, whatever. You could have really taken it down a notch, but the way you told the story made it stick in my head, even after all this time. There's definitely a power there.
There is. Stories have a ton of power. And when they are told authentically and with some craft, whether that's in a novel or a little verbal story over cocktails or in a song, it can have real power. And that is the power of storytelling. It connects us emotionally, as opposed to a lot of other kinds of communication, which is almost more informationally.
Right. And I feel like my instinct would have said, if you tell this really specific story about your life, the more specific you got, it would almost distance me from it. Like I won't connect to it anymore because that didn't happen to me that way. But I think actually the opposite happens.
Yeah.
We start to connect to it more and see how, even though that didn't happen to me that way, I can relate to the idea of being turned on to some music by somebody else.
Absolutely, it's true. So one of the things I talk about in the book is the secret sauce for a great story or a great lyric. And the secret sauce is half of what actually all of what you just said. The very specifics of a story is what makes it personal. And the universal themes of a story is what makes it connect with others. So in the story that I told you before, I was at summer camp and, it was after dinner one night and it was the late 70s and all this and that. And the counselor asks me to come in to the cabin where he's playing the drums with the Who and all this and that. It's very specific. The story itself is very specific, like you said. But the universal piece is that we've all, I suspect all your listeners here, have all had some moment where they're like, oh, I get it. I understand music. It blows my heart out. Wow, I gotta do this. All right, so that's the universal theme, at least for this community, right? Songwriters and musicians and stuff. And then my specific story around it. It's like, I tell this one to a more general audience. So this was back in college. I'm, in college. It's a beautiful autumn day. I decide, of course, to cut class with my girlfriend at the time. It's a Tuesday afternoon. We get out of there. We go get some ice cream. She gets the, chocolate with a ton of those colored sprinkles. We go down to this little park. There's a lake down there. We're standing on this bridge. And these little ducks go by. And all of a sudden, she's like, it's over. Like, what? So if I asked 1,000 people, have you ever experienced this exact story? The answer is going to be no, because it's too specific with the sprinkles and the ducks and all this and that, right? But if I ask those same 1,000 people who here has ever been dumped, everybody gets that. So that is the universal theme. And that's what we can do in our stories and in our songs. If we can connect that, bam, you will connect with your audience. And by the way, it's exactly what Taylor Swift does, right? She's really, really good at that.
Yeah, she has a knack for little details that say a lot. I remember one song sticks out where she talks about like leaving her scarf behind.
Mm-hmm.
And just this kind of little detail that sort of connects you back to a person, maybe even like intentionally done, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's almost like the traditional favor, you know,
Right.
from going back ages.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to have left your scarf to get this feeling of like you want to do something that will force this person to reach out to you again.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And it doesn't have to be a scarf, right?
Yeah.
That was her detail. But
Mhm.
it could have been hat. Could have been, I left my phone at your apartment. Like, I got to get it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I remember, I think my wife, when she was my girlfriend, left something. It might have been like a belt or like a
Belt,
boots or something, you know, like something, some other article. And it was like the thing, well, I had to get in touch with her again. And there's this like kind of excuse I was almost, you know, thankful for
right.
to have to bring up.
You should ask her if that was a part of her plot there.
Yeah, I think I did. And I think she said, maybe, you know, I kind of smile.
You'll never
Maybe
know.
now I'll ask her again now that, you know, she doesn't have to play games anymore.
That's right.
But yeah, it's funny.
That's
And you know, what's funny too is I'm realizing I was doing this today at my job as an English teacher. We just finished reading Of Mice and Men.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember that story, George and Lenny, and it's the big thing is well that I'm drawing some light on is just this idea of like an ethical dilemma. Like sometimes there's no right thing to do.
Sure.
And you know, I guess I won't spoil Of Mice and Men for everyone, but George has one of those big ones, and he makes a decision that, under any normal circumstances, seems ludicrous. Which I'll just say it, you know, the book's 100 years old, but he shoots his best friend, you know, kills him. But it sounds crazy that would be the right thing to do, but the author's crafted a world where that is actually probably the best thing for everybody, including his best friend. And, you know, none of my students have been through that. I've never been through that, but we all relate to that feeling of like, you know, there's just nothing right. What do you do here? And I brought in a Bruce Springsteen song, Highway
nice.
Patrolman. And he's a you know, like a state trooper, and his brother gets into trouble, and eventually, you know, he has to chase down his brother, but he lets him get away across the border. And you know, again, like I've never been in that position, but you get that feeling of like you gotta like you decide to do a favor for somebody. You have to weigh two different sets of values you hold and make a choice. But yeah, it's like nothing to do with those specifics, but it hits harder because it's so specific.
Because we've all had difficult choices. Doesn't matter who you are. You know, whether you're on the playground as a sixth grader or an adult, you know, like there are difficult choices in the world. Yeah.
I'm curious about, as far as detail goes, what your thoughts are about how much detail to give. Like, you didn't tell me much about the summer camp itself. You left me to fill that in, which was fine. Like, I mean, but in the ice cream story, which I remembered from your book, those sprinkles stick out. And that's a detail you could have left out. But what makes you decide, I'm going to put this in there, and maybe we don't need to go into this part of it?
Great question. So you're right. Many people add too many details that don't really matter and sort of detract from a story or a lyric. And then other people, of course, don't have enough details, right? So the question is, what details do you want to add? And I believe the answer is, first of all, it needs to be relevant. So in terms of the sprinkles, that was an evocative detail. When I told you that, I'm not inside your brain, but I suspect you're like, oh yeah, colorful sprinkles on ice cream. I get that.
It's fun.
Right? Yeah, it's fun. You can almost taste it. You can see it, right? It's really powerful. The pretty girl's got the ice cream. Oh, that's great. Right? It's like kind of burned into your brain. But I didn't need to tell you about, the parking lot in the park. Why does that matter? Unless it's relevant to the story. Oh, there were no spaces left, so we had to park on the grass. Okay. That makes it more adventurous, a little bit dangerous, something like that. So what you really want to do is, consider what are you trying to say with the story or the lyric? And then really consider, does this add to the story? Does it deepen the character or push the narrative forward?
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not a hell yeah, then it's no. Right. So when old Taylor Swift says something about the scarf, there's a reason for that scarf in that line. I don't really know what song you're talking about, but
I don't remember it too well, but
yeah,
I couldn't tell you the title.
Yeah.
It's a thoughtful thing, and I guess the ice cream cone with the sprinkles, that's fun, like you said, sweet, and even this idea of cutting class on a nice day or on this bridge. It sounds like you're setting me up for a good story, a romantic story.
Right. So that's another piece of the storytelling, the unexpected. Right? If we get what we expect, it's kind of boring. Right? If I said, oh, so we got the ice cream and we had this beautiful kiss in the middle of this day and, everything was great. Okay, nice, but boring. Right? You don't see the breakup coming in that one.
Right.
And, I specifically told it. So it's like, oh, this is young love and everything's going great. And right? So that's also what we want to do in our songs and in our lyrics. Think about, how can we not be so obvious about what we're saying? How can we turn the story, the lyric, the line, the word a little bit?
Right. Maybe even a little deliberate misleading just to get to set up the shock a little bit.
Exactly. So, that's a great point, which is the stories, your songs that you write. A lot of times artists and songwriters believe that it has to be true, like factually true. Don't let the facts get in the way of a good story, of a good line, of a good chorus, right? You're not a historian, right? You're not reporting for the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or something, right? You're trying to convey some feeling, some idea through your story. So however you can do that to make it better, I say go for it.
Yeah, I agree. I even do that with grammar, things like that, and in lyrics. Like they don't have to. Sometimes the lyric fits better if you throw in a couple extra words or mix up the structure of the sentence a little bit.
Absolutely. I was just driving the other day, and I heard some song with made up words. I'm like, this is perfect. Why limit yourself to the vocabulary that everybody else uses?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of singing is just like emotive sounds. Yeahs and ahs and oohs and things like that.
Right. If it connects with the audience, if it connects first with you and feels authentic to you, and then connects with the audience, well, that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get the audience bobbing their head, jumping around, throwing shit at the wall, falling in love, with you, driving fast, I don't know, like, what is it that you're trying to evoke in your audience? I mean, that's a good question to ask any songwriter to ask themselves.
Right. Yeah. The purpose of the song in a way. What am I trying to get to? I find that's a really great guidepost, is just emotional impact. If that's a lot of times how I make decisions, mixing even, or choosing notes, or whether the song should have a longer verse or not. Like, what's the emotional impact? And I think that's really kind of the whole point of a lot of music, is just to play with the emotions, to create emotions and feelings.
Absolutely. And that's what makes songwriters and musicians, producers, this kind of magical creatures, right? We can conjure these emotions and express them in ways that the mere mortals kind of can't. Right? The guy or the girl who wants to go out dancing on Saturday night, they get the vibe, but they can't create that thump. They can't, get the room moving by talking about it. Right? That's where the music comes in. We can craft that in a way that affects the world. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a superpower.
Exactly.
My first musical moment that sticks out to me was being a little kid, probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 at the most, being angry about something. I'm mad. I'm, just a rotten little kid, and I storm away, and I put on some music, and 4 minutes later, I felt totally different. And I came out of my room and I realized, like, I'm supposed to be mad. I'm supposed to be angry about something, but I'm not. And that song did it to me. And it struck me, and I was like, there's something going on here. This has a power.
Music is medicine, right? It can change us. So let me ask you a question. So do you put on music to alter your mood, like the story you just told me? Or do you typically put it on to match your mood? I'm feeling happy, so I put on a happy song.
Probably more often to match these days. I think it's when it comes on somewhere, that I'm not in control of the music, when it changes me more. I think a lot of times when I'm looking for something, and this might be why sometimes I scroll forever looking for, like, what do I want to hear today? I can have anything. It's too many choices.
Sure.
How do I feel? What am I in the mood for? And sometimes you almost don't even know.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and almost a bigger question, right? If we're finding music to fit our mood and our vibe, we have to know what we feel. Because if we don't, we can't pick the right music, can we?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I run into that a lot now that I consider it. Yeah, because, whatever, if it's an activity you're doing or just like a time of day, you can really make some serious mismatches. If I'm trying to fall asleep and some, heavy metal comes on, like, doesn't fit.
Not yeah.
But sometimes you're not aware exactly of where you want to go or where you are even.
Yeah, so from the composer's side, so you're talking about the listener's side now, but from the composer, the songwriter's side, that's also a really interesting question, right? I'm going into the studio, or I'm going to sit there with my notebook and write some lyrics. How do I really feel right now? What's really going on?
I know this feeling well.
Yeah.
Making me laugh.
And in my experience, and really in my clients and, associates, people that I've worked with over the years, many times we use the writing process, more specifically with lyrics or just words, to understand what we're feeling, to explore what we're feeling, so that we can express what we're feeling. And that is what an artist does. You have to know. You experience something, you internalize it, You interpret it, and then you express it.
Hmm. Well, that definitely happens too. Looking back at music I've made, I can see almost like phases I was going through, or kind of like, oh, I didn't realize that was going on. But, maybe down the road, I'm like, I've been really feeling that way a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the time, you almost feel like you're just throwing things together, picking out words and melodies and stuff. But it can be like an interesting self-analyzing activity to just
Absolutely.
see, what are you doing?
Yeah, and to do that, you really have to be vulnerable with yourself. You have to be willing to almost go to sometimes, scary or uncomfortable places within yourself. I had a poetry teacher, when I was in college, and she would talk about the turn of the poem. And what she meant was, we generally start out writing, we think we know what we're writing about. And we start writing, and we write, and then if you're doing it properly, somewhere in that poem or in that song, it's going to shift into something that you didn't know you were writing about until you wrote it. And that's where the truth of the poem or the song comes from. And then from there, of course, you can go back and, iterate on it, revise it or something. But we often don't even know what we're thinking and feeling until we express.
It's an interesting way to learn about yourself through what you write, but you got to show up, I guess, for that kind of stuff, right? You can't just like think about it and hope it comes to you. You sort of have to go through the process of putting the words to the paper or playing the notes, playing the music. I think there's sort of like a traveling through the weeds or the tall grass forest kind of period.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, that's why you kind of can't rush the creative process. A lot of people sort of think like, I'm going to just bust this thing out. Well, you can do it if you've got the skills, I suppose. But that doesn't mean you're going to really tap in.
Right.
Anybody can just write some chords. Okay, fine. But can you find the chords? Can you feel the chords? Right? Because if you can't feel them, nobody else is gonna.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And this is a balance I'm trying to figure out, I guess, on some levels too. Because I do like moving fast. I think not overly considering too many decisions, going through it, not getting stuck in endless options. And I think that's the real problem. There's just too many choices. We have so many tools these days. But sometimes you can blow past the phase of like searching through things a little bit in the interest of like charging to the finish line.
Sure.
It's a challenging balance to strike. Sometimes there's a lot of value in top speed, and sometimes it's good to pull back a little too.
Exactly. I mean, one of the biggest like problems, I would say, I mean, it's like a blessing and a curse kind of thing, is there are literally infinite choices in a decent recording studio at this point.
In a laptop.
In a laptop, in your freaking phone. Yeah. Right? I mean, one of the stories I used to tell my songwriting students when I was teaching at the college, now you've got like the guitar amp emulators, right? So you can get one of these things, and there's like a million sounds. You just plug the guitar in, and just like you can change it afterwards, this and that. It reminds me, the opposite of that reminds me of a story with Led Zeppelin. So one of their albums, they rented, I suppose, a castle in England somewhere, and they're like, we got to get a cool guitar sound. And they're like, I don't know, what should we do? They ended up sticking an amp in a chimney in the fireplace and pointing it up the chimney. And they had a guy at the top with a microphone down the chimney, right? Well, number one, awesome story. right?
Right.
Number two,
the beauty of giant budgets to make records.
right? But I mean, you could still do something like that, minus the castle, I suppose. But these days, producers, songwriters, they don't really think like that. They think a lot more like, well, it's just easier to kind of dial through these million sounds. And it is. It's definitely easier, but it doesn't mean it's better.
Right. Yeah, and that's a decision, right? That's a choice to go through the trouble of getting someone to climb up on the top of a castle. Who knows how high that was?
That's right.
And there's something that happens, I think, too, when you kind of commit to an idea. You sort of become a little bit loyal to it, and you appreciate it more. Whereas, I have Amplitude. I love it. It's great, but I'm always kind of wondering if the next sound is a little better.
Exactly.
And then maybe I star one that I like, and let's just keep seeing. But if it's like just my amp, I've got 2 decent guitar amps, one or the other, and go. Or if I take the trouble to set it up in the castle's chimney, then it's like we gotta use that. I got one chimney, kind of one shot at doing it right, and we gotta use that one. Just stick it in there somewhere.
Exactly. If nothing else, let's put it this way: 50 years later, we're talking about it. Nobody's going to be talking about which dial you changed on Amplitude. You know what I mean?
For real.
So again, stories, right? That's the story of Led Zeppelin's guitar sound. That's cool.
Yeah.
Right? Where we lose so much of that when it's just software and a million patches and tweaks and stuff like that. I almost want to, go to some artist and be like, okay, you can't use any of this shit. Right? Like, make a record like it's 1975. See what you can do. Don't rely on all this.
Yeah. It's a fun process. I have a 8-track reel-to-reel machine just over here on the side.
Nice.
And with my band, we have everything set up. It is going through the computer, stuff's getting processed, but then I just run it right to the tape machine. So we got the drums sounding nice, and then those went to 2 tracks on the machine, and then everything else went right to the machine. Nice. And it was so much fun, and it moved really fast. And all of those choices, like, which compressor, which of the, it was like, no, just we got to get it sound as good as we can. And I really enjoyed that limited, streamlined process where there just wasn't as much to think about. So we were forced to get creative in like other ways, microphone placements, and we didn't use the chimney. I didn't think of that, but
well, give me a call when you got that going on, man.
Yeah, right. But it leads you into those more adventurous situations. Then, well, we've got a really cool reverb plugin. We probably could sound like it, Jim. Probably sound better objectively, but
Back in the day, I was doing a recording, and we ended up getting one of those like aluminum trash cans. Those like old, right? Yeah. And what did we do? We like stuck the kick drum mic in there, and it's like stuff like this. It's just so much more fun, really. It's a different way to be creative.
Right. Yeah, let's see what happens if.
How can we mess with the sound or create a sound that is really unique? Even if it's like for sampling and stuff like that. Go find and record in the world really weird sounds. Then come back and make a beat out of it.
I think that's a lot of fun.
It is, yeah.
We have access to everything. Pretty much every drum sound you can imagine, even like the John Bonham kit, that's out there somewhere.
Sure.
But the random things you'll collect on a walk through the park today, even compared to tomorrow or a week from now, that's a unique, interesting collection that only you could get. And then how you process it and deal with it is also another layer of, putting it through your own filter machine of your mind and creativity.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff is fun. One of the ones I remember from years ago was I always liked the sound of striking a match, where the match kind of explodes there
Fizzes
for a
almost,
second. Fizzes, yeah. So I just remember sitting there in the apartment, like lighting all these matches in front of the microphone, trying not to burn the apartment down. Yes.
Right. Yeah. But a cool thing, a
Yeah.
cool, see what happens. There's a lot of stages to that sound now that I think about it. There's the kind of swipe,
Right.
then it kind of pops and then sizzles a little bit.
Yeah. It was a cool sound. I used it in a track.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How so? Was it like percussion or something
I
else?
used it with percussion. So I think I used it like in a drum fill where, maybe pieces of the strike were kind of coordinated with other, electronic drums or something. That's cool.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fun. And again, like, interesting story. And there are a few things, when I think back, of all the music I've done, it's always those kind of adventurous little things that stick out. The 1,000th time I've plugged my guitar directly into my interface and uploaded a preset or something. They don't really stand out much. Maybe the first time when I was like, wow, like listen to all these sounds I got. But other than that, it's useful. It's nice to have, but you can definitely bring a little, sass to your music that way, and a little story.
It almost makes me so, as a creativity coach, life coach, I'm always like thinking like, how can we do things differently? How can we change stuff? So like, how about this for a studio project? Create a song and make as many stories around the creation of the song as you can. So it's not really about the song. It's about the stories of making the song. So like I said, striking the match or putting the guitar amp in the, in the chimney. Like what else could, you maniacs out there come up with? How many stories? What could you do on the street? What could you do, like this is a Seattle band from years ago, the Presidents of the USA.
Oh, yeah.
Remember those guys, Peaches and all that?
Lump and Peaches, yeah.
Right. So I knew those guys.
It was a fun band.
Yeah, fun band. They're like, we don't want to play regular guitars and basses. So they kind of like made like it was one bass string and, something like this.
Yeah, they had like a 3-string guitar with like a bass string and a couple. Yeah, it was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Very minimal band. Even the drum kit, I think, was just like a kick and a snare and a hi-hat.
Yeah. But interesting stories.
Yes.
So, studio musicians out there or live players out there, maybe your next song could be how many stories can you create in writing and recording this thing? And please,
I like that.
Email me and tell me them because I'm psyched already.
Yeah, I think I'm going to borrow that because I started doing these weekly prompts for songwriting, the weekly music mission.
Cool.
And that would be a good one.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Give me a call when you get some of these going. Yeah. I definitely want to hear about this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's, what I like about that too is I just felt it happen in my mind where I stopped getting concerned about almost the outcome, but musical stuff, and I don't know, maybe this is part of my own musical insecurity where I feel like I need to kind of always do something clever. Like, is this smart enough? Am I doing something interesting here with the chords or whatever it is? Even though most of the music I listen to is pretty straightforward, but taking the focus to like, oh, maybe I'll like, the bathtub resonates kind of funny when you bang it with something like that's
when I stub my toe on it. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Now it's almost like I'm not responsible. I'm I'm doing all these experiments and I'm letting those things decide how the music comes out a little bit.
Yeah. And so I used to be a music journalist. When I first moved to Seattle in the 90s, I was a music journalist for the radio
Great
station.
place to be.
Yeah, I'll say.
Timing,
the radio
right?
station that broke grunge music to the world. And we were working on a little thing at the time. We weren't sure if it was going to happen. It was called a website. Yes, it turned out to be caught on.
So you invented the internet.
I did not invent it, but I did show up early. So as a music journalist, it was always about the story of the band. How can I write about a band in an interesting way? Having, a radio single, that's not a story. Who cares? Right? Sometimes the lyrics of the songs, if they were good, had a story. But the really interesting stories were things that the band was doing. So, for instance, one that I particularly remember, there was a band called Bicycle. And these are three guys, and I shit you not, they were really into bikes, and they somehow got their whole little set of instruments and stuff onto bikes. They biked across the country with their equipment, playing music. Like, it's insane. They got into Time magazine with that. And it was not because they were a great band. It was because they were biking across the country. It's a great story. Right? So it makes me, everybody's like searching for attention, online and everything like that. You got to have a great story. What's your story? What's interesting about you? No, quite frankly, we've heard all the beats, this and that. It's all, it might be good, but it's all, there's millions of songs out there. What's your story around it?
Yeah, and there's so much great music too. I mean, even just the great stuff you could never listen to that comes out. I read somewhere that like 120,000 songs get uploaded to streaming every day.
Good God.
So I was doing the math, and that's like some millions of songs per year. To listen to those, if those were like 2 minutes each, you'd be doing it for 200 years to get through this 1 year or 1 day or something crazy, But that's, I guess, where it matters, because which band am I going to listen to? Which song am I going to listen to when I've got a lot of great songs to choose from. But let me hear the guys that bicycled across the country.
Yeah, who are these maniacs?
Yeah, what's their deal?
Right? Or another great thing that you can do as a musician to kind of create a story around you is to think about what you really believe in. What do you really care about outside of yourself? Right? Is it the environment? Is it, some political cause? Is it, something like this? How can you attach your ideas to something bigger and support or express around that? And when you do that, you can see plenty of examples where this works quite well in getting attention and telling stories and creating stories.
Right. Yeah, it's a great thing to think about. And that's an interesting aspect too, as from the journalist perspective, to sort of help them. Help you, kind of, right?
Exactly, because I'll tell you what, 99% of the musicians and producers out there are not helping. Right? They're just like, here's my stuff. You're like, okay.
Yeah, that's not enough.
It's not enough.
Sadly.
Sadly. And, when you're talking about the uploads to the streamers and stuff, back in the 90s when we're still making records on tape, I was making an album with a band called Tumble here in Seattle. And, I was all into the music biz and stuff. And I remember reading back in the late 90s, before computers came in with all this, there were something like 20,000 independent albums released in a year in the US compared to, say, 120,000 songs a day
Yeah.
right? So that's how much the market has changed.
Right. Yeah. I guess it was a little harder back then.
It was a lot
Uh,
harder and a lot more expensive.
yeah. My high school band, we recorded 4 songs and put it on CD by the time, like, right about when we graduated, just before. And that was a big deal for kids like us,
Oh
in
yeah.
1998 to have a CD.
Oh yeah.
A year or two later, it made no difference. It wasn't enough to make a difference for anyone but our friends, really.
Right. Right.
Like anyone outside that was actually into music, into the music industry at all, was like, had seen billions of CDs. It was no longer a feather in your cap, but as a kid at that age, it was. But that went away really fast. A year
Mm-hmm.
later, it didn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone had them.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something that I think about a little bit with AI and generative music, that that's never gonna have the story. Well, maybe someone will figure out a way, but I've said this before. If I'm repeating myself to everyone, sorry, but like AI music is not going to make me wear ripped jeans and flannels like I did when I was 14 and Nirvana came out.
Right.
You know,
Right.
that was like a thing. Like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is a rejection of something that's been forced down our throats that we didn't really like anyway. So you latched on to it, but
Mm-hmm.
the idea of like kind of just like fabricated stuff, which I mean, a lot of music has felt that way already anyway, even with artists behind it, but more so now, like who cares is kind of the feeling.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because musicians are always going to keep making music. Okay, fine, but the business of music, once it's a business, and they want to do
Yeah.
everything as cheaply and as profitably as they can. So if you can buy a computer, use some software or whatever, and create a pop star where you don't have to pay them, they don't have to, they're not going to have to go to rehab in the middle of the tour, all this kind of
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
You can guarantee it's going to happen, right, from the business
Right.
side. It's only a matter of time. They've already done stuff like that in Japan,
Yeah.
maybe Korea and things.
I think
Yeah.
there was an attempt at a rapper too that really kind of backfired and didn't go too well. But these are the first efforts.
Yes, but the human heartbeat is definitely at the core of what music is, right? The AI can is going to be able to emulate that sonically, right? I mean,
Mm.
can play a synthesizer or now even guitar parts. I don't know if you saw that in Rolling Stone. There's some company that they're like, this is ready to go. Like it's almost ready for prime time, where
Yeah.
somebody on an app is just going to be able to do a voice or do a text prompt. The one that they said in Rolling Stone was something like, play an acoustic Mississippi blues
Oh,
guitar with a an old male singer singing about
Yeah.
whatever, and it happened.
yeah, I saw that. That was pretty crazy. And I would have never known that wasn't real. And it even sounded like an old recording, had like that flavor. Yeah, that's like you said, it is pretty much ready for prime time.
Yeah, so musicians out there, get your stories together and get your live show happening, because recorded music it's already a tough deal. It's going to be a lot tougher.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, for real. We got to do that. Get it together. So, how do we tell a good story?
How do we tell a good story?
You mentioned, I guess, the hero's journey. It's a decent place to start. Do you want to get into that for
Sure. Yeah.
anyone that's not familiar?
Yeah. So the hero's journey is a sort of template of storytelling created by Joseph Campbell. He was a guy who studied all these myths and from around the world and kind of came up with this idea of what the hero's journey is. And essentially, it starts with your hero and they're living their normal life, whatever's happening. And then something happens in their life, which in the hero's journey they call the call to adventure, where it's like, is the hero going to choose to step forward into this this adventure? And then the answer is yes, right? The hero has to go on the adventure for the story to happen. And by the way, this is a good thing to remember in your actual personal life, right? Your stories are going to get better if you choose the adventure. If you don't choose the adventure, you're never going to change. You're never going to really have much evolution of yourself. So anyway, you choose the adventure, and this is where things get difficult, right? You have some goal that you're after, and you're going to come up against challenges. They're going to get worse and worse, bigger and bigger. You're going to encounter allies and enemies along the way. And then eventually is the breakthrough. And the breakthrough is the shift between, on two levels. One is the external, and the other is the internal. And when both of these switch, the character changes, and they return to the world, a different world, a new world, right? They bring something back that is different and valuable. And this is essentially the hero's journey. Now, it might sound complicated, but it's really not that complicated. It just simply means we have to move forward, both in our personal lives and, let's say, in your song lyrics, and choose difficult things and get past them, and then we change. In the internal world and external, let's take Star Wars, the first Star Wars, which is a good example because basically everybody knows it. So the external change, well, first of all, the call to adventure, Luke gets, the droids show up and, here's Ben Kenobi, right? And he's like, oh, what the hell's going on here? That's the call to adventure. And then he's got to leave his home, the small planet. He's like, I got to get out of here. Call to adventure. All kinds of crazy stuff happens, blah, blah, blah. Kind of gets to the climax, the very edge, which is they're shooting down the Death Star, and he's got one shot left. And what does he do? He turns the freaking scope off, right? So that's an internal change. He's like, I believe in the Force. I believe it. I got one chance, and I believe it. Makes no sense, but he does it. And then he hits the target, and bam, saves the day. That's the external change. Right? So these are sort of the elements of story. Can you condense that into a couple verses and a chorus? Sure. You can do it. You just have to know what your story is, and you got to move forward with that in some way that shows the change and shows the challenge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny format too, because it just shows up everywhere. This idea of like the hero, they often reject it at first. Mm-hmm. They're not sure. All that self-doubt, and you're right. Even when it's like a big bad guy, a Darth Vader evil villain that they have to overcome, there's always something internal that has to happen as well.
Exactly. And the reason why this is such a powerful template in storytelling or in songwriting is because it is a distillation of our lives, right? We're all, just like we were talking about before, we're all going to have specific details to our lives. No one lives the exact same life as anybody else. It's impossible, right? But we also have similar themes. These are themes of trust and respect and making a living for yourself and love and healing and like all these big things that every human encounters in one way or another. So that's why this template sort of works with everything. And your job as a storyteller is, well, what kind of stories do you want to tell? And how do you tell them with craft and style? One of the ones that or a couple that I used, again, in my songwriting classes, and this is going to date me even further, but Jack and Diane, John Cougar Mellencamp, right? He's talking about these high school kids having these dreams, and then the chorus is, life goes on even after the thrill of living is gone. He's like, whoa, that's some wisdom. It sort of implies that the youth is not going to last, which it doesn't for anybody. Or another great one, don't stop believing. Journey. Just a small town girl living in a lonely world. Right? There's a story for you. Don't stop believing. That pushes it forward. Like, you got to keep going.
That's an interesting one too, because when that comes on, everybody relates to it. City girls, guys, like they all relate to this idea. You don't have to be a small town girl,
It's fascinating, and I've looked at this song, and I'll try to remember it here without screwing it up. Small town girl in a lonely world, taking the midnight train. She's got to get out. City boy in South Detroit. He's got to get out. So in those two freaking lines, you're talking about men and women, rural and urban. That's everybody.
Right. You've covered us all.
In 2 lines. Right. Like, you want to write a classic song? Do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is, it still amazes me that song still strikes people so hard. But you can understand, that, like you said, the universal themes are really what we're going at. That's where we connect. Our different stories are just kind of like our own paths, but we all wind up in that, whether it's loss or love or victory or defeat.
Mm-hmm. Some will win, some will lose. Some are born to sing the blues.
Right.
Right? It's like, who hasn't thought about that? Am I lucky? Am I a loser? Am I destined for this? Are greater things like going to be mine? Anybody who's got a
the
freaking
self-doubt, right?
Yeah.
So in your workshops, are you getting people, I believe you do like exercises to generate ideas and get started. Anything interesting you think might be useful to the musicians, songwriters out there?
Well, I love the idea that we came up with before, which is, create a song based on the stories of creating the song.
Yeah.
I think that's cool. What else could you do? A lot of your audience is around production. Yes, music production. What emotion are you feeling? What is authentic to you? And how can you create or capture that sound? Right? So instead of, dialing through Amplitude or one of these things, okay, I'm feeling angry. I'm going to take my little field recorder and go smash shit in the alley. Interesting, right? Very different way to approach it. Like, this whole thing is, it's about creativity. It's about expression. But we often tend to, kind of express in a similar way. Like, maybe, here's one. Come up with ideas. Write down words. Write down a whole list of words. Verbs, adjectives, nouns, whatever you want. Once you have this, pick one, and then go find or create a sound for that. Right? The word is flower. Okay, go find or make the sound of a flower. The hell's that going to be? I don't know. But, that's your job. You're the creative here.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thinking about it differently. There's that
lots of different results.
Yeah, different results. This kind of thing reminds me of that card deck that Brian Eno made years ago to stimulate creativity. It's basically just like, forget all the things you think you know about what you're doing and force yourself into something really weird. Like, one of the things he would say with bands is, okay, you're the guitar player, you're playing drums. What? You play bass, you're singing. I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, let's just see what happens.
Just flip it around.
Stuff like that. Play it left-handed. Play the guitar left-handed.
Yeah. It's one of my favorite times of all my band practices is when I get to play the drums for a little while. A lot of our ideas are born out of that actually too, which is kind of funny.
Hmm.
But we've had a couple songs get developed out of those jams.
Yeah.
There's something even like I usually have the mic as well when I'm playing, and you sing rhythmically when you're hitting drums.
Sure.
I kind of like very staccato, and um, it makes things come out of me in a different way. When you're just blabbering and jamming.
Right. So that's another gateway to different kind of creativity. And it's also a story.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
What if you play the keyboard with one hand? What if you taped two of your fingers together and did it? It's just like,
yeah, it's true.
Something
it's great.
I
didn't think of that.
They say, Jerry Garcia in Grateful Dead, he somehow lost one of his fingers when he was a kid. Yeah. I mean, this guy's like one of the greatest guitar players around. And it's like, yeah, he's missing a finger. Is it possible that he came up with weird, different, cool stuff because he just didn't have that finger?
Yeah. But I'm sure.
Right, exactly.
I would play different if I didn't have, I guess.
You sure would.
What, that must be like his picking hand, I guess.
I don't know. I don't know which one.
Yeah. Well, even, like you said, don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. It's a great example of what that does. Like now I'm gonna look into that. I want to know what's that story.
Yeah.
Well, who was it as the famous guitarist? I can't think of his name right now. Metal, get the fingertips. Jeez, isn't it Black Sabbath's guitar player?
I don't know.
I don't know why this is slipping my mind, but he's missing his fingertips. He's got these kind of things, little metal fingertips.
Oh, yeah, I don't know that one.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on it right now.
Ask AI.
Yeah, they'll tell me something weird. That sounds true.
Exactly.
There's something that you put in, that I think sums up a lot of what you're saying. This is a line from your book where you say you want to intersect your personal perspective with the universal themes of human experience. And I think that's a lot of what we're getting at here is how to see. Sometimes that's hard to see, I guess, too. Like how your own person, like what you said to me just about like me, a band switching around and playing the drums. Like there's the story. Didn't occur to me as like being story worthy. So it's a great thing to keep in mind that we're all having that in all of our experience, that we're all going through these universal things, but sometimes you have to almost step back and recognize it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about this idea of golden repair. You spoke a bit about the book. And there was a Japanese term for that I didn't put down, but how do you say that?
Kintsugi.
Kintsugi.
Kintsugi. It's a Japanese term for golden repair, and it refers to mending something, and it becomes more beautiful in that its character has sort of been broken and put apart, put together again. So, the typical image of this is like, this beautiful handmade vase that gets, cracked down the side, a couple of pieces come flying off. So they put it together with seams of gold, right? And you look at this thing, you're like, wow, it's even more beautiful because it's not perfect. Right? So that's a term in Japanese. And when I heard this, I'm like, wow, that's cool for a bunch of vases, but it's even cooler for us as humans because we all get battered and cracked and sometimes broken through the course of our lives. And then the question is, what are we going to do with that? Right? If we do not heal ourselves, well, or attempt to heal ourselves, well, it's going to get worse, right? Your heart's going to break. You're going to quit. You're going to whatever. It can go really south. But on the other hand, when we heal ourselves, when we go through that hero's journey, we become more beautiful. The seams of gold are within our hearts, within our souls, that kind of thing, right? When you understand how precious love is, because your heart's been broken, you're going to treat it, you're going to see it in a very different way. Stuff like this. So in the book and here, like how are we as individuals broken or have been damaged, and how can we heal that? How can we mend that? And then how can we express that in a story? Because again, universal themes, right? Everybody's got it. You can't find one human in life who's never been damaged and hurt. Yeah. It's not going to happen.
Right. Those are usually very formative experiences too. They make you who you are. And it's a good point. I think that's probably the benefit of getting your heart broken, right? Because then you realize how precious and fragile things are. And you maybe play a little more carefully next time, or more gently. But it changes you and how you approach things. But there's some of that too, even in some of the things we have. Like you get like that ding on your guitar at your concert. You're kind of like, yeah, it's kind of cool, Yeah. It's got some character now. It's you want to keep that thing in beautiful shape if you can, but you can look at that and be like, yeah, that was the time we played whatever, and crazy day.
I was in college. This is a great one. We're in one of my early recording stories. In college, in a studio, guitar player is this amazing guitar player. I was playing bass, and we're playing the song. It's a rock song. He's kind of doing the solo, and in the middle of the solo, his guitar like shorts out, and he literally bangs it he smacks it with his hand, and it comes on in this like sort of jarring thing, and then he just starts playing again. And we're done, and I'm like, let's do it again. He's like, no. I listened to this, 35 years later, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so beautiful.
Yeah.
Again, it's the story. It reminds me of like, we're in there, it's so exciting, the equipment's not working, bam, but we pull it off.
Yeah. That's a good point. And that of all the guitars you've done and recorded, that's one that sticks out.
Exactly.
It's got that thing that happened to it.
Right.
And you can polish that away easy enough, but...
Oh, especially now. So years ago, I had a job, a great job. I've had some great jobs in the music biz. This one was reviewing in what they used to call in-print catalog albums. So not new stuff, but things that were still selling. So I went to my boss. This was for this early internet thing. And he's like, come up with 100 of these albums and, you can go review them. So I looked through my collection and I came back with 300. And this is stuff like the Beatles and the Stones and Zeppelin and Billy Joel and Tom Petty. And, it's like all this stuff. It's like so great. And it's, it's still selling. So the job was, I spent like 6 months listening to these albums and reviewing them. I've heard them all a million times. But when I listen to them, I'm like, wow, there are full-on errors in a lot of these songs, right? The beat's a little off, like clearly off. The guitar doesn't quite catch it, right? But these are the classic songs. This is, if you fixed it, it would sound weird. Right? So again, kintsugi, right? It makes it more human. And by the way, the flip side of this is what all the digital recording is screwing with, right? You can make it perfect, so almost everybody does, right? And then you lose that humanity.
Right.
And now you've got, of course, your, the sort of screw with the quantization, humanize or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Make it perfect and then make it not perfect. You're like, okay.
Right.
Right.
Artificially humanized. Which I do love that you can do that. But yeah, it's a tricky thing, I think, especially if you're working alone, to know where that line is, because you're trying to be emotional and expressive, but you're also trying to get it right. Sometimes it's just nice to have somebody say like, no, 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 no. Don't record over that. Keep that.
Well, it reminds me of that Beatles song, Twist and Shout, one of their old songs. John's voice is like destroyed on that song. And
it sounds
they're like,
awesome.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah.
They're like, we're keeping it. They were singing all day. He was singing all day. That was like the last song they did. And if they would have recorded it, if they would have done a better version the next week, wouldn't have been better.
Yeah. Yeah, that like wear and tear comes through. It's just raw and emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how emotions are, You're crying and there's snot coming out of your nose and like, your face is all messed up, but that's how it is. It's not pretty.
It's not pretty. Just make sure you got the right level on that mic.
Yeah, right. It's a funny thing. I want to thank you for something you put in my head that stuck with me for a while. It was about the inner critic when we were talking about your last book, which was that not to fight it. I don't know if that was in the book or not, but it was something you said. But not to fight it, and almost see it as like a collaborator. I think
it is a collaborator. It just doesn't look like one. It's a collaborator in disguise. Right? The reason we all have our inner critic, right? You suck. You're not good enough. Blah, blah, blah. All that kind of stuff. We've all heard it.
Full-time position.
Full-time little bitch in there, right?
Yeah.
But the truth is that part of ourselves is there for a reason. And the reason is positive. The reason is to help us get better. When we feed the inner critic with negativity, shut up, inner critic, like that kind of stuff, all it really does is give it energy. And then it's louder and you feel worse about yourself, etc., etc. So the trick is you surprise this little bugger first by naming it, I like to call mine Mr. Craptacular, the Craptacular Babbler, right? And then you love it. Thank you for these thoughts. I don't really want to hear it right now, so I'll let you know when I want to hear it. And suddenly these sort of internal pieces start to align in a different way. When you get that going, you can use this energy more for your goals, whatever they happen to be.
It's a cool way to think about it because we can over-identify with those thoughts. And what you're really doing is almost just compartmentalizing it and identifying it as these are just thoughts I'm having. And by giving it this like kind of cantankerous personality, you can, okay, I hear you, but we're not going to pay attention to this right now. We're going to go somewhere else with their thoughts here.
Exactly, except for one tweak on what you said. We're not compartmentalizing it. We're integrating it. Right? When it's the other, when it's outside of yourself, that's when it gets the power. And that's when it screws you up. When it's like, oh, you are a part of me and you're trying to help me. Come here, friend. Right? That's really different. That it loses its power. Its negative power.
Almost like collaborating with a group of people, and there's one that's always going to say, it's not, I don't like it. But it is a valuable perspective to hear sometimes. To have,
yes.
I guess that really saves us a lot of dangers, in the real world, stops us from doing stupid things. And
Yeah.
Sometimes, I guess, making fools of ourselves too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's like the inner critic is part of us. It's never going away, right? But how can we relate to it in a different way that is more valuable and useful for us and what we want and how we feel?
Right.
Yeah.
It's an important thing, and it's stuck with me. Since we've spoke, I've thought about that a lot. Just in like when it comes up to just okay, so it's time for you to speak up. Okay, that's
right.
Thanks for your input.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll see you next week.
Right. Maybe later.
Yeah, maybe later. I'll take a note. Yeah. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, cool. So the book is called The Magical Impact of Storytelling. Jeff Leisawitz. It's available anywhere, right? Amazon, you can...
Amazon would be the place to be, but yeah, you can probably get it anywhere.
Right. So we can send people there, and I think we can also send them to your website too.
You should definitely send them to my website, where I would be more than happy to do a complimentary coaching session with people.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I help people all over the world on Zoom, all kinds of creatives, musicians, rock stars, which I can't really name here, screenwriters, advertising people, authors, podcasters, really anybody. So in the creative process, in the business aspects, really, I mean, I've kind of been around, let's put it that way. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody. Just sign up on the website and find the time, and yeah.
That's incredibly generous of you.
Hey.
Very nice.
I'm here to help.
Cool. That's at jeffleisawitz.com.
That's right.
And those links will be in the show notes. I appreciate you coming back and sharing word of the book. And it was a great read. It's nice, and you can read it in a day and an afternoon. I like that, by the way, more and more. Things distilled down. I'm sure you're obviously a talented enough writer if you wanted to really stretch this out into some gigantic thing, but you really get down to the point, which I appreciate a lot, because I want to act on this stuff, not just keep reading about it.
Exactly.
So more and more, even like my sample packs, I like them smaller. I like fewer choices, less to go through, so I can get things going. So I think you did a really nice job distilling a lot of really helpful and encouraging ideas that are inspiring at the end of the day. Finish that book and you're like, okay, let's do it.
Let's rock. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Thank you, the listener. It's great to have you here. And we hope you have a great day.
Yeah. Rock on.
Rock on. Awesome, man. Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.